Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Music of the Hemispheres. I'm your host, Matt, in the UK, and over in Australia is my co host and cousin, Will. Hey, Will, how are you?
Hey Matt, good thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, very well, and very excited about this episode. I've really enjoyed researching this band. We'll get into that in a second, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on notifications if you want to be notified when we upload a new episode of the show. You can also follow us on Instagram at Music of the Hemispheres to see what we're up to there. But Will, which band are we covering today?
So today we're covering Pink Floyd, which is exciting. And before we get into the albums and the songs, I'll just give you a little bit of a cursory background to Pink Floyd. So they formed in London in 1965, and the lineup was composed of Roger Waters, Syd Barrett, Nick Mason, and Rick Wright. And they recorded their first album in 1967. And I guess, as is well documented by now, Syd Barrett would leave the band the next year following some mental health problems and addiction issues. And David Gilmour would be welcomed into the fold and assume the role of lead guitarist. So this lineup would remain for the late 60s and all through the 70s. And this is when their classic period really took place. And ultimately in 1985, Roger Waters quit the band. So that was a very public rift between him and Gilmour, something that they never really recovered from. And thereafter released 3 studio albums, Sans, Roger Waters. Their final album was released in 2014, which only featured David Gilmour and Nick Mason, as Rick Wright had died in 2008. So they've got 15 studio albums all up. And yeah, Matt, they're definitely one of my favorite bands from that time. I wouldn't say they're my favorite band, but they'd probably be sneaking into the top 20. I do love Pink Floyd, and I think they've got an amazing variety in their catalogue and universally loved for a reason. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not sure they would sneak into my top 20, but I don't think they'd be too far outside. My parents had a very small but high quality record collection when I was young, mostly absolute classic albums in rotation. And one of those was The Wall. So I've been familiar with that album since I was very young and filled in the gaps over the years since then. Hugely influential band, one of the UK's greatest ever. Really enjoyed listening back through their considerable back catalogue to put this together. Just just in the interests of time today, we're going to quickly run through our bottom 5 album selections, and then we will alternate for our top 10 picks as usual. So, Will, do you want to get us started with your bottom 5 Pink Floyd albums?
Yeah, so my number 15 is Ummagumma from 1969, which I'm giving 2 stars. And this is a double album. The first disc is live, which isn't too bad, but has 3 of the 4 songs appear on the first 2 albums, and I just think I might as well go there to listen to them. And then the studio album is a real misstep. It's got compositions from each member, and it's very disparate and not very connected, a bit indulgent and boring, and sometimes downright annoying, like the song Several Species, dot, 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 because it's got a very long name I'm not going to read out. And this is a Roger Waters composition, and if I never hear it again, it'll be too soon, that's for sure. But there's nothing here that really grabs me, so that's number 15. Number 14 is The Endless River from 2014, which I've given 2 stars. And here it's mainly an instrumental album, actually. It's their last one. And it's not like anything is so unpleasant, but it doesn't really hook me in. I think it lacks a bit of identity. There's no question the playing is immaculate, but I actually don't find it very engaging. So I think that it definitely deserves to be down here. My number 13 is A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which I'm giving 2.5 stars. This album was released in 1987, the first one without Roger Waters. Huge 80s production on this. I don't think it's an absolute howler, as some people do, but it does lumber along a little bit. Some highlights I'd call out are Learning to Fly. It does have that huge 80s kind of bombast to it, but I quite like that. There's some great solos on the Turning Away and Yet Another Movie. Terminal Frost is pretty good, but the parts like A New Machine Part 1 and 2, I just wonder what they were thinking with those. They're just really weird tracks, and there's a couple of other really mediocre ones. So that's my number 13. So my number 12 is More, which is from 1969. This is a soundtrack actually to a movie. It's not a bad set. I'm giving it 3 stars, but it's just not that cohesive like other Pink Floyd albums are. I think there's enough good things like Crying Song at track 3 is really slow and eerie. Main theme at track 8 is a really spooky, slithery sort of number. And the Nile song track 2 is quite good, but I just think the production is really grainy and horrible. I think they really botched that. But overall, a pleasant listen, I guess. 3 stars. And then my number 11 is The Final Cut, which I'm also giving 3 stars. This is from 1983. Some of this album was conceived for The Wall. It's very slow. It sort of floats by without making too much of an impression. Very austere, very Roger Waters. Not exactly their funnest listen, but yeah, I think there are some good numbers here. Your Possible Past features a great Gilmore solo, Fletcher Memorial Home, and the final cut itself. I really like. It splits opinion. Some think it's very underrated and will defend it to the hilt. Others think it's terrible. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think the biggest crime is that it's just a bit boring in parts. So that's my 15 to 11, Matt. Over to you.
Okay. So I was absolutely convinced that we would have a huge amount of variation in our rankings and our ratings today. But my bottom five are exactly the same as your bottom five, albeit in a slightly different order. And I've assigned some different star ratings. So, but I can run through these very
Interesting.
quickly. 15, Amagama, 2 stars. So exactly the same as you. Yeah, it is a real
Wow.
curiosity for me. I actually don't mind the live part of the record, as you mentioned, but the studio stuff, it's quite avant-garde, which is fine in theory, but I just find it really impenetrable. I don't think it works
Mm,
at all. Some of the live stuff is kind of quite hypnotic, but also quite aggressive, and I quite like that. But I think you used the word indulgent for the second side of this record, and I couldn't agree more. The title is supposedly Cambridge slang for sex, but in this case, I think it must be pretty bad sex because I don't enjoy this very much at all. Number 14, same as you, The Endless River. I've given it 2.5 stars. So, it was their kind of ambient farewell. It's quite reflective. It's very much a tribute to Richard Wright, who'd passed several years before, but it was built largely from unused sessions recorded during the Division Bell era. So for me, it just doesn't really function as a proper album of songs.
mm,
It is contemplative, it is spacey, it's got that kind of lush cinematic production, but it feels like a patchwork quilt of stuff which hadn't really worked for them previously. So it wasn't necessarily going to work for them now either. Number 13, I have More from 1969. I have that at 2.5 stars. As you mentioned, their first soundtrack album written for a French art film. It's quite varied stylistically. It's sometimes quite
yeah.
atmospheric, it's sometimes messy, but I think it is quite underdeveloped on the whole. It's kind of a gateway between the Sid Barrett era psychedelia and the more expansive progressive stuff that they would do later on in their career. I like Green is the Color. I like Cymbeline. They're really nice, quite dreamy and melancholic. There are some folk influences there that I like as well. But you also you mentioned the Nile song, which in comparison to some of the other stuff is quite aggressive. So I do like that juxtaposition. It just doesn't feel like it hangs all that well together. On to number 12, which is A Momentary Lapse of Reason at 2.5 stars. My issue with this, and this has been well reported, this is not any major insight on my part, but this is really a Gilmore solo album, not a Pink Floyd record. That production is very 80s. It's got that huge gated reverb on the drums. It's got loads of synths. There are times where it's quite cinematic, but I don't think it's aged that well at all. It's almost like 80s guitar pop, and it feels very much of that time. Whereas a lot of their better albums, I think, just feel almost timeless. I can't say that about this record. I did like Learning to Fly as a single at the time. I like it less so now, I would say. And the guitar on Sorrow is worth calling out. That's amazing, but it's overproduced. It was mostly performed by session players, so I hardly even consider it a Pink Floyd record, really. And then rounding out the bottom five is The Final Cut from 1983, which I also have at 2.5 stars. And like my previous selection was like a Gilmore solo record, this is almost like a Roger Waters solo
Yeah.
record. So it really lacks the cohesion of a full band at the top of their game, really. It is emotionally very raw. There are strong themes of war loss, that post war British decline. Apparently, it was inspired heavily by the death of Roger Waters' father in World War II. I actually really love the production, like the whispered vocals, some of the orchestral arrangements, but it feels very claustrophobic to me. And I find it difficult to really get under the skin and enjoy it. So that is my bottom five, which are the same as yours, albeit with some variation on the order.
So moving on to our top 10 then, and so we'll see how we line up here. This is a jump to albums that I really like. So I'm going up to 3.5 stars for my number 10. It's Atom Heart Mother, which is from 1970. I thought this would be a bit higher, to be honest, but it slid down a little bit for me. It's an enjoyable album, and the title track I like, but I just don't think it needs to be 23 minutes because it does repeat itself. I think it could be probably half that time, to be fair. I do love things like the ominous chants in there and the horn intro as well. It's very heavy and brooding. If is a bit of a sleeper of a track, neither here nor there at track two, but still pleasant enough. I really like Summer of '68. I just love the piano and vocal melodies, really lovely. And That Old Sun, a bit like if it kind of floats on by, but it's pleasant. And then you have a weird track like Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which is very random. I mean, this is a Pink Floyd album that it's characteristic of the time where it's not so cohesive or anything, but there's some interesting ideas slapped together. So a lot of people hate it, but I like it, but I don't love it.
So my number 10 is A Saucerful of Secrets from 1968, and it's 3 stars for me. So again, from number 10 onwards, I'm into albums that I really do enjoy a fair bit. Production wise, it's quite experimental. It's quite spacey, quite psychedelic. They're using tape manipulation. They're using lots of organ drones, etc. And they're getting a bit looser with the song structures, which I really like. But I think it's very much the band searching for a new identity after the Sid Barrett era, because it kind of swings wildly between that psychedelia and darker, more experimental songs. You still hear Sid's influence on things like rock band blues. There are also plenty of signs of where they were headed after this. The title track's the key moment on the album for me. It's huge, sprawling, kind of chaotic suite, which runs the gamut really from real dissonant noise into an almost spiritual high at times. It was the blueprint, I think, for work they would do later, songs like Dogs and Echoes. So not perfect, but certainly a step up from the bottom five for me. Number 10, A Source of All of Secrets.
Okay, so my number nine is Obscured by Clouds, which I'm giving 3.5 stars. This is from 1972. It's the album before Dark Side of the Moon, so before their real classic run. And I really like the first two tracks. I just think they're stunning in the atmosphere they create. So this is the title track, Obscured by Clouds, and When You're In. They have a bit of a dark edge about them, very moody, very atmospheric. I wish the album had this kind of atmosphere all through, but I guess from tracks three and four, it takes on a bit of just more of a soft rock, folkier style, which they want to do sometimes. But I just think it breaks up the cohesion that you thought you were going to get based on the first two tracks. I really like Childhood's End, track seven. That's a really nice philosophical song about time and aging. All up, I think this is a pretty solid album. I'm happy to listen to it, but definitely not one of my favorites. So it's sitting sort of mid-order Pink Floyd for me.
So my number 9 is the debut, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which I have at 3 stars. I do feel like some of this is a bit sketchy rather than fully developed, but it's obviously one of the defining psychedelic albums of the 60s, and Sid Barrett's influence is all over this record. So it does feel like a very different piece to all of their other albums. It was actually recorded at Abbey Road while the Beatles were making Sergeant Pepper. I don't know how much they were egging each other on, but I think for a debut, it's amazing how experimental it is and how free they were to really follow their instincts on this record. It's almost like childlike in places, but also a bit weird, a bit unstable. As an album, it feels almost like walking a tightrope. It could veer off at any moment, but it just about manages to hold itself together. Tracks like Astronomy Domine and Interstellar Overdrive are obviously hugely influential songs on later psychedelic rock. But just don't think it's quite consistent enough to reach the top echelons of my rankings. Like I said, some feel a bit more sketchy rather than fully developed. Super essential album historically. Everyone should listen to this record. But for me, it's at number 9, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
So my number 8 is The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and I agree with a lot of what you said. It's hailed as one of the most influential early prog albums, or psychedelic rock slash prog. Yeah, it is an important document and part of their discography. It's got a lot of raw energy, but yeah, it is very uneven. And I think the last four songs I don't really like so much. I think they get a bit gimmicky, a bit too childlike, maybe. There's something about it. I really enjoy the first half of the album, particularly the first four songs or so. I think Astronomy Domine really, it's like you're taking off on a spaceship. I love the guitar tone on that. Lucifer Sam is a great crossover track between psychedelia, and pure pop. Really dissonant riff, great vocals from Sid Barrett. Matilda Mother and Flaming are both great. You got to call out Interstellar Overdrive as well. That's a real head spin, but just a bit uneven. I think. I think 3.5 is about right for me.
Yeah, absolutely agree. My number 8 is my first at 3.5 stars. It's 1972's Obscured by Clouds. It's often called kind of the forgotten Pink Floyd album. It came between Medal and Dark Side of the Moon, as you mentioned. But I think that's a massive shame, as I think it's really very good. It's another
Mm.
film soundtrack, but I think it is much more focused and accessible than some of their other more progressive work. It's really warm, it's really melodic. And I really like the blend of folk rock, blues, and prog. It just feels very relaxed and self assured to me. And it doesn't take itself too seriously, I don't think, unlike some of their other records. Having said that, What's the Deal and Childhood's End feel very Dark Side of the Moon, so they were forerunners for that record. I think on the whole, though, it feels very organic. There are some dark themes here, like on 3/4, which is about dying and doesn't pull any punches lyrically. But other than that, it almost has an upbeat feel, which is not something you get that commonly with a Pink Floyd record. So for me, it lacks a big moment on it, and that's why it's at number 8 rather than further up. But it is a very charming record, and I like it a great deal. Number 8, Obscured by Clouds.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. It's a bit overlooked, that one. My number 7, sitting still at 3.5 stars, is The Division Bell, 1994. So this is the second album without Roger Waters. It's really well produced. The 80s bombast is taken away, and this feels a lot more intimate and clean and cuts through a bit more, I think, or a lot more actually. Probably has one or two too many ballad like tracks, which weighs it down a little bit as the album progresses. But I got to say, I enjoy this differently to other Pink Floyd albums. It feels for me like a bit of a pop album, like a bit of a guilty pleasure, maybe, because it is very earnest, but it's also got a bit of bite. So the song "What Do You Want From Me" is a bit spiteful, isn't it? And you get that in some other songs like "Poles Apart" and "Lost for Words." But yeah, just to call out "Coming Back to Life," the synth intro there, and then you've got Gilmore's amazingly crisp guitar over those synth chords, just amazing. Some really good instrumental numbers like "Marooned." That's, I think, a bit of a fan favorite off that album. So it's a really nice atmospheric album to put on at home, just to relax to, or when you're doing something else. But I think it just ties a little bit at the end. Still an album I really like, 3.5 stars, and I think it's also overlooked by a lot of the fan base.
Okay, so I'm still at 3.5 stars for my number 7 pick. It is one that you've already spoken about, Atom Heart Mother from 1970. Again, it feels like one of their more transitional records. It's kind of half big orchestral, ambitious prog experimentation, and then half very understated pastoral English folk. But I quite like that juxtaposition. The title suite obviously dominates the whole record. It's 23 minutes, blending kind of brass arrangements, choir sections. It's very proggy. It's slightly bizarre, but I think it is a really beautiful song. I think the band criticized it as being overblown. So, I mean, if they're even saying it's overblown, then maybe there's something to that. But I like it nonetheless. The second half is much warmer, much more intimate. I think tracks like Fat Old Sun and If really kind of reveal a much gentler side to Floyd than I think we've seen before. I like the production. It allows both sides of the record to breathe really nicely. But like a lot of Floyd records, I mean, if I could say my major gripe with Pink Floyd is that a lot of their records seem quite inconsistent, and I think this is one of them. But it's a fascinating record. I think it's, like I say, that midpoint between their early career and where they would go on Medal and Dark Side of the Moon, etc. So, yeah, an interesting record historically for me. Number 7, Atom Heart Mother.
Okay, so number 6 for me is Metal, and this is 4 stars. So it's not a huge leap to 4 stars. So it's not miles ahead of the other 3.5 star records that I spoke about. And I am a bit surprised that this is seen as so far superior to the other albums that aren't their big four. It is one of the better ones, and I still think it's not so cohesive. So all of the songs are very different from one another, but it does execute each style very well, I think. So One of These Days has that kind of two basses pulsing effect, the synthesizer washes, and it's got a real presence to it. It's a very driving sort of track. Really nice come down to A Pillow of Winds. That's a bit like what you spoke about with the songs on Atom Heart Mother. Really pleasant. Fearless is a great pre-Dark Side sort of favorite of fans. Pleasant little jam, nice chord progression. Yeah, of course you have Echoes, which I feel it's also 23 minutes like Adam Hart Mother, and I feel that it could also be a bit shorter, but it does have some absolutely exceptional moments. So, and its climax is just amazing, like one of the great Pink Floyd moments in the whole discography. So, a really good album, but it's still a couple of notches below, not my next one, but the ones after that.
So my number 6 is another one that you've already spoken about. It's the Division Bell from 1994, and like you, I have it at 3.5 stars. And like you, I think it's probably their most underrated album. It feels very reflective, very mature. Doesn't suffer from some of the production issues that the one before did suffer from. It's far less angry than Roger Waters' era Pink Floyd, but
Yeah.
I really respond well to that, particularly the production on headphones. This album sounds absolutely gorgeous, and it sounds very expensive to me as well. It's very rich, it's very spacious, very atmospheric. I called out a couple of the same tracks as you as well, Marooned and Coming Back to Life, but also High Hopes, I think is amazing, particularly for David Gilmour's guitar work on that. It's not as sharp, it's not as lyrically pointed as Waters' era, so it does lack some of the stuff that Roger Waters brought to the band. But I think it's a good representation of where the band were at that point, with Gilmour as the primary songwriter, and I think emotionally it resonates quite strongly. So yeah, I'm very happy to have the Division Bell at number 6.
Okay, so my number 5 is A Saucer Full of Secrets, which I'm giving 4 stars. So it comparable to the last few that I've spoken about. And this is the album where Sid Barrett basically quit the band and was encouraged to quit as well for his own health. Initially, David Gilmour came in to lend a hand. So he think he came in before Sid Barrett quit, but his influence here is really clear. It's a lot more melodic than Piper at the Gates of Dawn. As brilliant as that was in parts, this is just cuts through more for me anyway. The opener, Let There Be More Light, it kind of sounds like Block Rock and Beats by the Chemical Brothers. I don't know if you thought of that when you listened to the intro, but yeah, it sort of descends into a bit more kind of a downbeat, dark sort of psychedelic number. Then you have Remember a Day, which is a bit more wistful, I guess. Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun at track 3 is really hypnotic and mysterious, I think, and I really like Corporal Clegg. It's a bit satirical and sarcastic. I enjoy that. Probably the low point of the album is the title track, which you spoke about before. I don't think it's bad, but it just doesn't need to be 11 minutes. So if that could be a bit briefer, then that'd be good. But it's all said and done. It's a good album, and I love the album cover as well. That must be said. So 4 stars for me.
Okay, so I am also up to 4 stars on my number 5 pick, but it's the album that I mentioned listening to a lot when I was very young, from 1979. It's The Wall, which is almost rock opera, isn't it? It's very much a concept album. I spoke about it when we did our double albums episode, so I won't go into too much detail here, but those themes of isolation and trauma and self-destruction come through really strongly, and it's built around this fictional character, Hank, in a way that tells a really compelling story, I think. And it's kind of almost brutal at times. The production is amazing, as it often is on their albums. It's full of these kind of recurring motifs and layering up of different arrangements, and there are some huge hits on this as well for them. You've got Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, of course, and Comfortably Numb, but it is very intense, almost to the point of being an exhausting listen. So it's certainly not one for every mood for me. But when I want a bit of the wall, I want a bit of the wall, and nothing else will do. So, not there aren't many rock albums which I think have been as ambitious as this and really delivered, kind of wrung everything they could out of the Taos, and this is certainly one of those. So number 5, The Wall.
Well, I'm shocked because The Wall is not on your in your top four. It's not on your Mount Rushmore of Pink Floyd albums. It's certainly on mine. Mine's a very traditional looking Mount Rushmore of Pink Floyd albums. So yeah, that's my number 4, and I'm giving it 4.5 stars. The true rating probably sits closer to 4 stars, but it's just such a great undertaking, great concept, executed so well. So I think that thematically, it brings it up another half a star. We have talked about it on our double albums episode, the themes and whatnot, but just a couple of things that, yeah, it's very creepy and isolating. I think that has a bit to do with Roger Waters' voice. He has that effect a little bit. Also has some of their most accessible radio-friendly tracks, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. So, Another Brick in the Wall, sweet, very angular nature to the songs, and just makes your ears pop. Young Lust, things like that. They're really short, snappy, punchy tracks. I have over time grown to love the sort of bleakness of the album. So the songs that would not have been so appealing before, like Don't Leave Me Now and Is There Anybody Out There, things like that. And a couple that probably don't get a lot of love all the time, but Nobody Home and Vera, just, really nice acoustic songs. Nobody Home is, more haunting than anything. It does tire a little bit towards the end of disc 2, and sometimes I don't listen to the whole thing front to back, disc 1 and disc 2 together, but yeah, I do love it, and there's a lot of great highlights here, and also a lot of variety within the album. So that's my number 4.
Yeah, I agree. Bleak is a great descriptor for it, which is I think why I need to be in a certain mood to really enjoy
Mm.
listening to that, and why it just missed out on my Mount Rushmore. And in its place is my number 4 from 1971. It's Medal, which I also have at 4 stars. So there's not much to pick between this and The Wall for me. But Medal is very much where I think classic Pink Floyd really emerges, and they finally find the right balance between, the experimental, more psychedelic, more progressive work with real emotional depth and real kind of discipline in their songwriting. And it does mainly make the top 4 because of Echoes. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. As you mentioned, it's 23 minutes long, so it takes up a huge slice of the record, but it's absolutely worth it for me. Goes from that kind of almost eerie ambience to just huge, soaring, beautiful parts. Lots of improvisation in there as well, and then it resolves really nicely at the end as well. So, yeah, I think it's a blueprint for a lot of the work they would do later on. It's very dynamic. They're bringing some new kind of ambient influences into the band a bit more. I also really like Fearless and One of These Days. I love the bass line on that. Seamus is one for me that I could do without. I think most people probably would agree with that. But like I say, this is the birth of Pink Floyd as I know and love them. So number 4 is Medal.
Okay, so number 3 for me is Animals. It sits at 4.5 stars. So, I think this is released before The Wall. So I think it was the darkest and most cynical album they'd done to date. It does take a few listens to fully appreciate this, I think, because it's just maybe not as full in the production or crisp as Dark Side or Wish You Were Here. Very claustrophobic, very brooding, perhaps a bit less expansive than some other albums musically, but still really moving, I think. It has 3 huge tracks which sit between the bookends of Pigs on the Wing, and I really like those bookends. And then I might speak about one or two of the tracks in the top 10. So I don't want to spoil that. But this does live in the shadow of Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall. And I think it should not feel self conscious at all in that company because I think it truly belongs there. So yeah, this is my number three.
It is also my number three, but I have it at 4 stars, and I don't have too much to add to what you said. I agree, it is the darkest album. It's quite cynical, inspired loosely, apparently, by George Orwell's Animal Farm, but it's certainly very kind of anti capitalist, anti class structures. It's over 40 minutes, but it's only 5 tracks. So it feels almost classical in its presentation. I think it's one of David Gilmour's finest moments in terms of his guitar work on this record. You know, the production is quite almost industrial in nature. I think you use the word claustrophobic. I would completely agree with that, and it's very much of its time. It represents, I think, a lot of political feeling in the 1970s. But some have said this is not an original thought from me, but some have said that is it about that, or is it actually about the fracturing of the band that was happening during that era? I'm not sure, but like you say, many fans have this right at the top of the list. I think there are two greater albums, but number three is Animals.
Okay, so my number two, and we're moving to 5 stars, is Wish You Were Here. And this is an amazing follow up to what was their most ambitious work to date. And this is definitely ambitious as well. It's got its own identity that's completely removed from Dark Side of the Moon. Really spacious, not overcrowded, but it has so many good layers to it. And I think this is one of Richard Wright's best moments. You know, his synthesizers and his keyboard work is just amazing. Some of Gilmour's best work as well. I'm sure some of these songs will get mentioned in our top 10, but really for me, just to call out one that I won't have, but I really like it. Welcome to the Machine, very paranoid, and especially with that low pulsing synth, it just gives that unsettling sort of feeling. And then a song like Have a Cigar, which is sung by Roy Harper, and that's quite a clever trick in a song because they're critiquing industry people. So I think it's clever to have it sung by someone else, not one of the two main singers. Of course, the title track. So it's a hair between this and Dark Side for me. I think Dark Side is maybe a little more cohesive thematically and sonically. So, and it's just my personal favorite. That's all it comes down to. But this is a classic, 5 stars.
Okay, so my number two does differ from yours, but it is a 5 star album, and that's The Dark Side of the Moon from 1973. And I don't have very much to add to the reams and reams and reams that have been written or spoken about this record. And I don't want to steal your thunder because it's obviously your number one pick, but I do think
Mm.
it's one of the most unbelievably perfect constructed albums ever made. The themes are universal. They're covered, I think, really well lyrically. It's seamless in how it's presented. All of the transitions work really well for me. I mentioned one of the albums earlier as a great headphone album. This is probably the ultimate headphone album, right? The production is just bringing things in and out and surprising you at almost every turn. Even when they get a bit more mainstream, like on Money, they do it with a weird time signature, so it still feels very Floyd. I'm not going to talk too much about individual tracks on this because we've got the top 10 to come and it features fairly heavily on that. But I think there is an album that just speaks to me more than this. But I absolutely can understand that this is as perfect as any band ever got, I think, with balancing experimentation with something that was hugely accessible to the masses. And I don't think that was deliberate. I think they just were making the best record they could make, and they accidentally stumbled on this almost perfect formula. It's an absolute classic. I don't need to say any more. But my number two is The Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, well said. So that's my number five as well, 5 stars. And yeah, just to say that it's a really colossal leap from Obscured by Clouds. When you compare the two, it's just different worlds. Really colorful and rich. Those are the adjectives I kind of think about when I listen to this album. It's all tied together so well. And yeah, it just feels like such an event when you listen to it. It hits the right buttons. It can be relaxing, it can be intense. You know, every song it has its own identity, but it's really also somehow in tune with the rest of the album. Just a great kaleidoscopic psychedelic journey. So we'll say more about it with individual songs. But over to you.
Yeah, well said. My number one, of course, is Wish You Were Here, which I also have at 5 stars. And there's not a great deal between these top two albums for me. I just find Wish You Were Here slightly more emotionally resonant for me. And I think that's often what I look for in music. It feels so real. It's mostly around, thematically about Sid Barrett and the challenges that he faced throughout his life. So it feels so deeply personal in a way that Dark Side of the Moon doesn't for me. Intimate, I think you said spacey. It has so much room to breathe, doesn't it? But I also find it slightly sad in a very beautiful way. It's very dynamic. It's very warm. It has that real emotional core of "Shine On You Crazy Diamond" parts 1 to 5. I can't think of a better tribute from his friends to Sid Barrett, and the title track is an absolute classic as well. But also Welcome to the Machine and Have a Cigar, as you mentioned, that's kind of a critique of the music industry itself, and they do that, with almost with a wink very well. Interesting fact that Sid Barrett unexpectedly turned up at the studio while they were recording this record, but he changed so dramatically in his physical appearance that apparently the band barely recognized him, which again maybe lent to that huge feeling of melancholy in their writing about him in this record. There are absolutely no weak moments on this record for me. It's absolutely perfect, and a close number one against Dark Side of the Moon, but it has consistently been my number one for a very many years. Wish You Were Here.
So, because those two albums got at least 4.5 stars, and indeed they both got five, they will move into our Music of the Hemispheres Hall of Fame. So, welcome to Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here.
Okay, so shall I start us off with the top 10 tracks?
Let's go.
Don't forget that we always post a Spotify playlist of our top 10 track selections in the description of the video. So you can access that there if you want to listen along as we get into our top 10. Okay, so my number 10 is from Dark Side of the Moon, and it's Money, which is one of their most kind of accessible hit songs. But as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the album, it's Pink Floyd, so they're not going to do that in a normal way. They've got a 7/4 timing on the bass, which makes it almost feel like you're a bit seasick listening to it. It's got all those sound effects, the percussive track made up of cash registers ringing and things like that. So they've managed to really marry together a really accessible pop rock song with a very Pink Floyd treatment, and it works absolutely perfectly. Yeah, not much more to say about it, but that line, "Money, it's a gas, grab that cash with both hands and make a stash," is super catchy but super pointed as a lyric. It's what they do very well. Number 10, Money.
Okay, so my number 10 is actually a bit of a back catalogue hidden gem, and it comes off A Saucer Full of Secrets. It's Seesaw. So this is just a really beautiful, soft, tender track that comes after the 11-minute title track. So, which doesn't give you much melodically. So this one really is a warm embrace for the ears, a very kaleidoscopic blend of elements. Just the way the opening chord is played, even, and then the descending strings that come between lines and fuzzy synth touches. I mean, sort of have to listen to the song to know what I mean, but it's almost a bit random in its structure. But I just really think it's a lovely little slice. So Seesaw, number 10.
Great. So my number 9 is from The Final Cut, which is an album that I had in my bottom 5, but I do love this. It's the Fletcher Memorial Home, which is, almost quite a bitter song. It's about a retirement home for corrupt world leaders and politicians named after Walter's father. It manages to feel quite angry and political, but also very emotionally raw at the same time. I think it's one of the most raw vocal deliveries in their whole catalog. It really hits me very hard when I hear the way in which this track is sung. It's quite slow, it's quite cinematic, but the arrangement really builds nicely from the piano intro into this huge David Gilmour guitar solo. Hugely impressive piece of work from them. Number 9, the Fletcher Memorial Home.
Yeah, nice pick there. So my number 9, we're going 11 years forward in time to the Division Bell. This is the song Poles Apart. And I really love the acoustic opening, really hopeful sounding, really crisp, really earnest. But, it's over some really spiteful lyrics that I think might be pointed at Roger Waters. And I like that that juxtaposition. This song's pure ear candy for me. It's almost the most accessible they get. There's a big interlude in the middle with some strings and ambient sort of things. Probably for a couple of minutes, it kind of stops in its tracks like that. It's probably a bit unnecessary, but I do like it. And then it rushes back with the third verse, which is sung really well by Gilmore, and the outro solo is just spot on, really expressive. It's one of my favorite slices of Gilmore playing. So yeah, really catchy track. Actually, a bit of an earworm. Poles apart.
Very nice pick. I must say, none of my picks are particularly deep cuts. I seem to mostly respond well to the Pink Floyd songs, which are the most popular. And this is no exception. From Dark Side of the Moon, my number 8 is Time, which is about aging and regret. It has that massive kind of explosion of clocks and alarm clocks going off, etc., which apparently was recorded live. They just gathered together as many antique clocks as they could and set them all off and recorded the result. But that's really nice. It kind of unfolds really nicely. It starts with those rototom drums, but it becomes quite groovy by the end. And David Gilmour, both in terms of his vocal performance, which is astounding, but also the guitar solo, which is, I would say, even more astounding, it's a real high point for him, I think. There's that line, and then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. So it does feel quite wistful and full of regret, but musically it's not presented necessarily in that way throughout the whole song. It goes on quite a journey. I really like that. And I mentioned it's one of my favorite Dave Gilmour influenced tracks, but you can't ignore Richard Wright on this either, with the chords and his vocal harmonies as well. So yeah, it's a real band effort, this one. Number 8, Time.
Yeah, nice one. So my number 8 is from Animals. It's Pigs, Three Different Ones. This has a really plucky little bass line that starts the album with some carnival like synths as well in there. And yeah, it just gets into a really funky sort of groove and kind of sharp, distorted chords by Gilmore. So I think those three elements create a great interplay there. Yeah, this one's sort of ethical leaders as pigs, so to speak, and as you said before, loosely Animal Farm related. But yeah, I really like the vocal melodies on this as well. It used to not be one of my favorites, but it's really sort of shot up the order for me. So, and I think it creates a great centerpiece for Animals, the album. So yeah, Pigs, Three Different Ones.
Okay, my number 7 is also from Animals, but it's Dogs, which is one of their huge, sprawling epics. I think it's about 16 or 17 minutes long, apparently about businessmen sacrificing humanity for their own personal success. So it's, quite a savage Roger Waters lyric where he's, telling them that when they lose control, they'll reap the harvest they've sown. It actually starts feeling quite acoustic and warm though, so it kind of suckers you in a little bit at the start of the song, but it becomes kind of colder and more paranoid as it progresses on. Another great David Gilmour guitar part on this. The solos are super melodic. They almost feel like they're about to fall apart, but they're very beautiful in that sense. You have the almost ambient section in the middle. It has those dog barks in the background, etc. So it feels like it's almost collapsing in on itself. But yeah, that combination of prog rock with jazz fusion, etc., is something that they do extremely well. One of the bands where I actually really enjoy some of the more epic, sprawling tracks from them, including this number 7, Dogs.
Okay, so my number 7 is also Dogs. So just to add to that, I really feel with that acoustic guitar and its sort of relentless rhythm at the start, I actually feel that immediately creates a kind of paranoid, unsettling, eerie atmosphere, and I really like that. The lyrics are fantastic. They're sort of half paranoid, half predatory. And Gilmore's vocals and phrasing, I really like that all round. You mentioned his guitar work, and Rick Wright, his synth parts and just straight up keyboard play are fantastic. I feel like this is the centerpiece of Animals, and landed number 7 for both of us.
Indeed, yes. My number 6 is from The Dark Side of the Moon again. I think my third pick from there so far. It's The Great Gig in the Sky. Obvious why I have this in my top 10. It's one of the greatest vocal performances of all time. It needs almost no lyrics, but still feels so human and full of emotion. It's just perfectly performed. Also, you just mentioned Richard Wright's work. His piano on this song is absolutely beautiful. I love that chord progression, and
Yeah.
I love even more the way he plays it with so much feel. Yeah, shout out though to Claire Torrey, who was drafted in for that vocal part and could not have nailed that any better. Yeah, it only took a few takes apparently, but when you're that good, I guess that's all you need. Very contemplative. It's at parts. It's hugely emotional for me at other parts. It's just the beauty of music done perfectly without even really needing to give a lyrical message, because it just can find that emotion just in almost wailing vocals. Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. Number six, The Great Gig in the Sky.
Yeah, nice. I'm glad you have it there because shamefully, I haven't put it in because I wanted to fit some other songs in, but it truly deserves to be in there. But my number six is from the same album. It's Any Color You Like, which is number eight. And this is just a great kind of psychedelic trip, kaleidoscopic sort of number. And I feel like this is probably a torchbearer for a lot of prog bands or for prog the genre itself, because it feels like it's influenced so many bands. And like your pick, has no lyrics, but really doesn't need any. It's just so colorful in the way that it's played and leads so beautifully into Brain Damage. So my number six, Any Color You Like.
Okay, so my number five is the title track from 1975's Wish You Were Here, which, is going from The Great Gig in the Sky with pure emotion in terms of the size of it, just the scale of it, to something that's equally as emotional for me, but because of how small and simple it is, very direct. Again, another song about Sid Barrett, but I think it's quite universal, which is why it's such a famous song and been covered so many times. I think so many good lines in it, but we're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl year after year. Really sums up that feeling of disconnection, I think. So it's much more folky and kind of acoustic than a lot of the other things they were recording around that time. But I just cannot hear that song done better any other way. I think they've absolutely nailed that arrangement, and just things like the actual sound of the acoustic guitar, the way it comes in the intro, and everything is just perfection, perfectly placed. Very plaintive but affecting for me. Number five, Wish You Were Here.
Okay, nice. Number five for me is the last song on that album, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, parts 6 to 9. So this has the mini moog synth fading in and really slow sort of groove. I really like the lazy drumming of Nick Mason. Nothing special, but it's just a really relaxed sort of vibe for the first few minutes. And then you get these cosmic textures from the synth. You almost feel like you're in a sci-fi movie or something. And then, of course, it really gets going with Gilmore's solo. But I love when he reverts back to the opening riff that was introduced in the first Shine On You Crazy Diamond. That's 438, actually, if you're listening along. And one moment I really love is that funky synth groove that happens later on. I don't have the exact timestamp for it, but that part where it gets really funky. I just love that. That's one of the best moments in the whole catalog. So yeah, it brings the album to a great close. Shine On You Crazy Diamond, part 6 to 9.
Lovely. Yeah, fully endorse that pick. My number four is From the Wall, and it's Another Brick in the Wall Part Two, which was Pink Floyd's only number one single both in the US and the UK. So I guess their biggest song as a result of that. And it's always amazed me. It's such a weird, at times very cold album, but you just have this thing sitting in there which is super funky, super upbeat, almost poppy, very disco influenced song that shouldn't work on that album, but somehow really does. It's Dave Gilmour playing those disco licks. It could be Nile Rodgers, right? It's so out of their comfort zone, and yet it still feels completely Pink Floyd. So yeah, it just shows that they could pretty much turn their hand to anything they wanted to at that stage in their career and really nail it. The children's choir, etc., is very famous. You were talking about how well Nick Mason can do kind of relaxed drumming. This is like the opposite of that, but he does it equally well. This is a super tight groove, but he's absolutely nailing that. And obviously one of the most famous rebellious choruses in history, with the tagline "We don't need no education," just manages to be a big radio hit and a classic Pink Floyd song at the same time. So I love that. Number four, Another Brick in the Wall, Part Two.
Okay, very nice. Number four for me is Mother. So I find this a little hard. It's hard to articulate why I love this song because it's very simple and very, very patient in its build up. You've got some acoustic chords at the start and Roger Waters singing in his very somber voice. I could understand if someone wouldn't really like his voice, but I think it works really well for certain songs. And the lyrics or asking his mum certain questions, and then you get Gilmore in the lower register coming in to play the part of mother in the chorus. The piano part in verse two is really lovely. And yeah, just all around, it must be the vocal melodies or something that I can't quite put my finger on why I love this song, but it's absolutely one of my favorites. So I just had to put it up here. Mother, number four.
Yeah, I'm glad you're mining the catalog a little deeper than I am, because the hits keep coming for me. Number three is comfortably Numb, also from The Wall, which I think, and again, this is not an original thought. I think this is widely accepted, but it's the point at which the collaborative creative process between Roger Waters and David Gilmour was kind of at its strongest. It's combining Waters' darker kind of storytelling and colder kind of approach to music with then this huge, big, expansive, almost it's not upbeat, but it feels positive kind of chorus from David Gilmour. Yeah, when it just explodes into that line, "There is no pain, you are receding," it almost feels like you're entering a completely different emotional state. But I love the way that they transition there. And there are not many more famous guitar solos in the history of music than Gilmore's on this song. It's absolutely iconic. Also, it doesn't really stand out for me. It feels absolutely just placed exactly where it should be placed. It's part of the bigger whole. It's a beautiful composition. It's a beautiful arrangement. It's full of amazing performances. Yeah, it doesn't get much better than this. Number three, Comfortably Numb.
Fantastic. So my number three is from Dark Side of the Moon. It's Us and Them. So this is a quite a long track, 7 or 8 minutes, something like that. And it's really slow. It's not in a rush, but I love every second of it. From the gentle organ and guitar part going over it at the start. Just it's very dreamlike, like you're floating on a cloud, and then the sax comes in, and that adds another really beautiful layer to it. And then the thing about it is when it gets into its chorus, it becomes so intense and so grandiose. So it's perfectly placed in the album as well, because I feel like it needs to take a little bit of a breath after the songs that have come before, which have a lot going on in them and they're intense in a way. But this one lets you space out a little bit, but still gives you that really emotional hit in the chorus. So yeah, Us and Them.
Okay, so my number two is also Us and Them. And I don't have too much to add because you just summarized it beautifully. You're right, it is perfectly placed on that record. I think it is their most beautiful song, even though lyrically it's kind of mining a well-trodden path for Roger Waters around, conflict and war. Has that line, "Forward he cried from the rear and the front rank died." It's still quite brutal, but musically it's just stunningly beautiful. Another real Richard Wright highlight. You mentioned the saxophone, Dick Parry, I think, playing saxophone on this track, which just adds so much beauty and warmth and brings a certain sense of melancholy to the proceedings. I love the kind of smoky jazz club vibe of the presentation of this song, whilst also, like I say, being lyrically almost quite dark, very immersive, amazing on headphones, as many of their tracks are. Number two, Us and Them.
Couldn't agree more. My number two is Comfortably Numb, which you spoke about moments ago. And yeah, I'd written down that I also love that sort of interplay or juxtaposition of the sort of ominous Roger Water part, very sort of oppressive and then, with David Gilmour's part coming in with the gentle turn of the strings, I would say, as great as the last solo is, my favorite phase of the song is when he first sings I've Become Comfortably Numb, and then he goes on to his first solo, and then it comes back into I've Become Comfortably Numb. That is my favorite little snippet of that song. Just absolutely awe inspiring. Number two, probably no surprise that it's up here. And there you go.
Yeah, great. You had the second suite of Shine On You Crazy Diamond further down your list, but Shine On You Crazy Diamond parts 1 to 5 is my number one. For me, it's certainly the emotional heart of my favorite Pink Floyd album, but I would go further and say I think it's the emotional heart of their entire catalogue. It is the most perfect tribute to Sid Barrett. It says parts 1 to 5. I actually don't view it as the parts being that different because I think it transitions between those parts so absolutely perfectly. Like, although it has dynamics, it still does feel very much as one piece of music for me. As you mentioned earlier from the second part, you get that kind of upbeat section at the end, which feels like a bit of a shift, but it feels like a very natural shift. It feels like that's where it's begging to go at that point in the song. You can't beat the way it opens as well. The kind of 4 note, very expansive guitar figure played by David Gilmour there, and that line that it comes in on. Remember when you were young, you shone like the sun. Is, like I say, just a perfect tribute to their friend, and I feel that a very emotional pull of the song throughout. Throughout all of those sections, it manages to keep that real focus so strong, even though it's drawing from lots of different places: ambient, jazz fusion, psychedelic rock, prog rock. No one else could have ever written that song. So for that reason alone, for me, it is the perfect Pink Floyd song. Number one, Shine On You, Crazy Diamond, parts 1 to 5.
Very well deserved number one. My number one, you've already talked about, and this is Time from Dark Side of the Moon. So once you get past the clocks ticking and all that, it's just such a majestic build up with those single notes fading out, and then the rototom that you spoke about. One of my favorite Pink Floyd songs lyrically. This is really matches the urgency of the build up, but then it's got that nice and warm little section. Tired of lying in the sunshine, staying home to watch the rain. So it sort of goes between something more intense and then something a bit more comforting. And then when they sing, and then one day you find 10 years gone behind you, and David Gilmour's solo after that, I think that's his pinnacle moment as a guitarist. And I think you mentioned that he sings so well on this song. I have to agree with that. After all of that, when the reprise of Breathe comes, I just think that's so inspired and sort of links back to Breathe at track two. Of course, sets the stage for Great King in the Sky so well. I think it's got the best elements of Pink Floyd, and yeah, it's always been my number one, and probably always will be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great number one pick. I actually didn't mention the fact that it transitions back into that reprise of Breathe, but that is absolutely perfect, isn't it? What a moment. So thank you all for listening and following along. It's slightly more difficult, I find, when it's a band that are so famous that everyone kind of already knows what you're talking about. But hopefully this was interesting for people to get our views on the album rankings and the top 10 songs. How was that for you, Will?
yeah, loved going through their catalog again. Always rewarding, and you find a few more things from the back catalog that you can take forward in time as well. So yeah, it was good.
I'm looking forward to the next episode even more because I would say it's probably my favorite band of all time.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a favorite band of all time. Yeah.
So if you know me, no surprises, you know who that is. If you don't, that's something to look forward to next week. But thanks very much, Will.
Thanks, Matt. See you next time.